So get this. Back in April 2026, a huge shift in U.S. medical policy, it wasn't hammered out in some stuffy committee room. Nope. It happened because of a single text message. And that text, it basically changed the entire game for psychedelic medicine pretty much overnight.
And this is the text. Sounds great. Do you want FDA approval? Let's do it. I mean, seriously, it sounds so casual you'd think it was a meme. But this little exchange, it kicked off a monumental shift in US policy. The consequences were absolutely real. So you gotta be asking, how in the world does a text message, become official US policy? How does it just sidestep one of the most powerful rule-bound agencies on the planet? Well, that's the mystery we're gonna unravel today. Let's dig in. All right, first up, policy by text message. To really get this, you have to understand this text didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was more like the explosive finale to a conversation that was suddenly bubbling up everywhere, all at once.
Just think about the timeline here. It's wild. It all starts with a podcast conversation that just catches fire online. Then, boom, that text message we just saw gets leaked to the public. Days later, not weeks, days, an executive order is being signed in the Oval Office. And at the same time, you can literally watch the internet light up as searches for ibogaine go through the roof. This wasn't just policy being made, it was a cultural moment moving at the speed of a meme.
Okay, so why? Why did this all happen so fast? And why were people so ready for such a radical move? To answer that, we gotta rewind a bit. We need to talk about the years, and I mean years, of frustration that had been building up against the FDA and all its red tape. And this right here really lays out the two sides of the coin. On one hand, you've got the traditional FDA path. We're talking years of trials, rigid studies, a mountain of bureaucracy, so slow. But on the other hand, you've got this urgent, desperate need from patients, especially veterans dealing with PTSD. Research on promising new treatments was just stalled, and people were left feeling like they had absolutely no options left. This timeline really shows you how we got to that boiling point. Think of it like a pressure cooker. Back in 2018, the Right to Try Act gets signed. That kind of opened a tiny crack in the door. But then fast forward to 2023, and the FDA slams it back shut with these super rigid new guidelines for psychedelic research. The real tipping point, though, is probably in 2024. A really promising MDMA therapy gets flat out rejected. So you can see it, right? Each step just cranked up the pressure, building and building until bang. April 2026. So, with all this pressure built up, how did they actually pull it off? What was the mechanism? Well, here's the clever part. The executive order didn't create some brand new law. No, it just dusted off a legal tool that was already sitting there, on the books, basically waiting for someone to use it. And that tool is the Right to Try Act of 2018. Now, the key thing to understand about this law is what it was originally for. It was meant to give patients with life-threatening illnesses a chance to try treatments that had passed basic safety tests, but were still stuck in that long final approval pipeline. Essentially, it's a legal backdoor to get around the FDA's massive waiting game. So, how does it work in practice? It's actually pretty straightforward, kind of like a three-step process. Step 1, you have a patient with a really severe condition, let's say PTSD. Step 2, you identify a breakthrough therapy, in this case, ibogaine. And then step 3, the right to try law kicks in and creates a pathway for that patient to get the treatment without having to wait for the final stamp of approval from the FDA. That's all the executive order did. It just pointed at that pathway and said, okay, open this up now. All right, so we've seen how it happened, but what does this all mean for the future of psychedelics? For the future of medicine, even? Because let's be clear, this wasn't just some friendly suggestion. This was a direct order to some of the most powerful agencies in the country. And the order laid out some very specific marching orders. First, it told the FDA, you will establish this new access pathway. Second, it pointed at the DEA and said, you need to take another look at rescheduling these substances, moving them off of that super restrictive Schedule 1 list, the one for drugs with supposedly no medical use. And finally, it made one thing crystal clear. The top priority, right out of the gate, was getting ibogaine to veterans. And this quote from President Trump at the time really sums up the whole public-facing reason for it. The idea they were selling was simple. We're cutting through the bureaucracy to give hope to people who have tried everything else and are suffering. It was framed as a direct rescue mission for patients. So that's where we are. A single text message born out of a viral podcast moment used a nearly forgotten law to completely bypass decades of red tape. It's a lot to process. And it leaves us with a massive question, doesn't it? Is this a crazy, reckless precedent? Or was it a much-needed shock to a system that was fundamentally broken? And maybe even more important, what happens the next time a text message changes the world?